All right, welcome back. So, talked about this notion, this concept of continental drift from Alfred Wegener. Let's talk about some of the evidence to support that model, which would lead to the theory of plate tectonics. Well, thinking about how the continents fit together, where is the true edge of a continent? Well, the continents don't stop at the shore, at the beach. Continents don't stop there. In fact, continents go out, a little bit underwater along something called the continental shelf. So the continental crust, two types of crust, oceanic crust, continental crust, talked about that at the end of Unit 1. Well, it's made of rock, and rock is very susceptible to being ground down, broken down. That's a process called weathering and erosion by water. So as ocean waves occur, they break down the continent, so part of it eventually gets ground down and is underwater. But the true edge of the continent extends out along the continental shelf all the way to the continental rise. So that's where the true edge of a continent is. Sometimes that continental shelf is long, sometimes it's very, very short. So when we consider that and we think about how these continents might fit together, let's look at the continents again. So the continental shelf is kind of this lighter color. So the continent itself, you can see there's some gaps there, but when you consider the continental shelf, when you add that as far as how do they fit together, they fit together almost perfectly. They fit together very, very well, much better. So let me move me out of the way. So again, the continental shelf. So note, including the continental shelf improves the overall fit, aside from a few small areas of overlap. But in any case, considering the continental shelf, those things fit together a lot better. So not only do the shapes give us that evidence, what about the geology? What about the rocks themselves that make up these continents? Well, when we look on either side of, again, South America and Africa, just as an example, we can see that the ages of rocks really kind of closely match up. It's a pretty good match. So not only do the shapes tend to match up, but the ages of the rocks tend to match up. Not only do the ages of rocks tend to match up, the kind of geological features also tend to match up, kind of recreating Pangaea. So putting together Africa, North America, and Europe this time, we can see long continuous mountain chains that formed as Pangaea was coming together, and these continents were kind of crumpled up. We can see these long mountain chains, noting the ages of these mountains, this geologic feature, the types of rocks that make up this geologic feature. They also match up when we kind of recreate Pangaea. So shapes, ages of rocks, geologic formations. And fossil evidence is great for geology, and it tells a very good story. There are a number of different fossils that don't make much sense where we found them, but if we recreate Pangaea, it starts to make a little more sense. One of those examples is something called Glossoteris. Glossoteris was an ancient plant, tree with leaves. And here's an example of a Glossoteris fossil here. Now, what scientists found these fossils on was South America, Africa, India, Australia, which isn't all that rare. They have trees now. But they also found this fossil on Antarctica, where there are no trees. There's really nothing on Antarctica as far as vegetation, maybe small little lichens and moss, and that's about it. But they found these fossils on Antarctica. So, what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that Antarctica wasn't always where it was. If Antarctica was always in the bottom of the Earth, then it would always be cold. There would be no chance for it to ever really grow trees. So that means Antarctica wasn't there. Antarctica had to be somewhere else. Antarctica has moved. Now, recreating Pangaea again and mapping where these fossils have been found, it makes much more sense that these leaf fossils from this particular tree, Glossoteris, is found in kind of a similar region, because we recreate Pangaea, we can connect the dots. Other fossils, like a Mesosaurus, small little reptile found in Brazil and South Africa. Now, typically, when we think about animals now, the animals we have in Africa are not the animals we have in South America. We have giraffe and lions in Africa. We don't have that in South America. They're separate. They're separated by an ocean. Evolution has taken place to where we have different species in North America, different species in Europe. All of these populations of animals evolved to kind of be their own thing. So if we're finding fossils of the same animal, but on two different continents, recreating Pangaea, it makes much more sense. Oh, this area was connected. That's how all of these same fossils can be found on both of these continents. Typically, we wouldn't find that if they were always separate. So they must have moved around. So there's a couple of other fossils as well, Synagnathus and Lystrosaurus. More on Lystrosaurus in the Unit 2 assignment. So just keep an eye out for that in the Unit 2 assignment. This is Lystrosaurus. Oh, so cute. So cute. Actually, just a little thing, kind of like a little puppy dog. Oh, let me move me here. Look at that. Look at that little guy right there. Oh, Lystrosaurus. Anyway, more on Lystrosaurus in this year assignment. All right, so we got shapes. We have ages of rocks, geologic formations, fossils. What else do we got? What other evidence of past movement is there? We also have something called glacial striations. So glacial striations occur on a rock surface as a glacier kind of moves over an area. Glaciers move, albeit very slowly typically, but glaciers do move. And when they do move, in some places, they kind of scour that bottom bedrock that they're sitting on. Glaciers are so massive, and ice is very, very hard, especially if you have, a mile-thick slab of ice moving over an area. It will just slice right through rock, scratch rock like it's nothing. So we find these scratches, these striations in rocks in places where glaciers once were. So the great evidence for glacial movement. Now, we found these striations, glacial striations, on places, well, there's not really any glaciers. Australia, it's rather warm. India, southern India, rather warm. Africa, rather warm. We're talking about Brazil and parts of South America here, typically rather warm. So all of these areas have these glacial striated rocks, meaning that glaciers were once there. Well, how could that be? That doesn't really make much sense. Recreating Pangaea, it makes a little bit more sense. Maybe move me again. Once you kind of put everything back together, you can see that these glacial striations, the directions of these, are all kind of emanating from one spot. One spot. When glaciers flow, they kind of radiate out in all directions if they're not channeled in a valley or something like that. So the direction of these glacial striations makes much more sense when you recreate Pangaea. Not only that, putting everything together, these continents were not where they once were because glaciers need cold environments, and a lot of these places are warm environments. So you have South America, Africa, India, Australia, Antarctica. Now, Antarctica currently is on the South Pole. It says North Pole here. Kind of tricky. The magnetic poles, north and south, actually flip back and forth on the Earth throughout time. That's a little bit beyond this class, but that's why it says North Pole down there. All right. So what do we got? Shapes of continents, ages of rocks, and geologic formations, fossils, glacial striations. We have all of this evidence. So evidence of past Pangaea. But something is missing, and that's proof of current movement. Okay, all this evidence I just talked about, well, that proves that in the past continents have moved because they must have been together if we put all the pieces together. But they're not now, so therefore they must have moved. Well, they're moving in the past. We don't have any proof that they're moving now, do we? Well, yes, we do. So there's something called seafloor spreading. The seafloor, in some areas underneath the ocean, the seafloor splits and moves apart along what's known as a mid-oceanic ridge, or a rift. And the oceanic crust actually diverges and moves away from this mid-ocean ridge, this rift. As it does, as the kind of ocean plates are moving apart, hot mantle material from below is kind of filling in that gap. Remember, that's that hot Play-Doh mixed with rocks. It moves a little bit. It's not liquid like the liquid outer core. Mostly solid. Well, that mantle material kind of oozes back in there, kind of fills in the gaps, cools, solidifies, creates new rocks. So as oceanic crust is moving apart, that mantle material fills in the gap, cools, creates brand new rocks. So you get new oceanic crust forming. This is a decisive piece of evidence for plate tectonics, and the piece of evidence that really showed us that the seafloor is spreading is if we look at these mid-oceanic ridges, these spreading centers, as we move further and further away from those ocean centers, those mid-ocean ridge spreading centers, the rocks get older and older and older uniformly, kind of in both directions. Now, we figured this out. The Navy figured this out in the mid-1900s. They were doing some seafloor mapping for submarine travel to make sure, the submarines, because submarines don't have windows, they rely on the knowledge of the seafloor. So the Navy was mapping the seafloor, and they came across these structures to help us kind of add current proof, like, oh man, these spreading centers, they're spreading right here. Now again, that happens very, very slowly. So in any case, seafloor spreading, that's a current proof that plates are moving around. And then throw some technology in there, GPS. We can pick a spot on Earth and we can watch how it moves. Again, these move very, very slowly. As continents are drifting around, as plate tectonics is taking the continents and shuffling them around and taking the crust and moving it around, they move very, very slow. On average, it's about as fast as your fingernails grow, so very, very, very slow. But GPS has been a great, valuable tool. Again, you can use it to track plate motions as the ground moves. Points on the same plate generally move in the same direction. Plates are kind of rigid. So what does that tell you then about, this is the United States, here's Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. So points on the same plate move about in the same direction. So you can see, for example, the North American plate, which the United States sits on, is kind of moving down and to the left, so to the southwest. But portions of the United States are actually moving up and to the left, to the northwest. It's because portions of the United States and in California is actually on a different plate. So that's why it's moving in a different direction. So great, we have all of this evidence of past movement via Pangaea, shapes of continents, ages of rocks, matching geologic formations, fossils, glacial striations, all kinds of fun stuff. And then current proof of plate movement. We have seafloor spreading that we see currently going on. We have GPS, all of this stuff. All right, so we can use all of this evidence and proof to now recreate how the surface of the Earth, how it changed, and what it looked like. So we can go back, recreate Pangaea. Now here's the fun part. Pangaea wasn't the only supercontinent to ever exist. This was just one set of evidence to lead us back to the latest supercontinent and Pangaea. Finding more and more evidence, knowing that plates move around, we can go back and actually recreate a number of different supercontinents. And here they are. Now we're going to pause here. We're still in the middle of section 2. We'll pause here. When we come back, we'll talk about some of these different supercontinents. I'll see you back here in just a second.